This is day 31st or 31. I'm reading Reader Come Home by Marion Wolf, page 123. Thus, my 21st century variation of Socrates' worries involves several interrelated questions. Will our culture's continuous flow of information and distraction alter or diminish young children's attention and memory? Will the fact that most answers are immediately available online cause older children to exert less effort to learn things for themselves? If either of these is true, will our youth develop such a passive response to knowledge that eventually the store of what they know and their ability to connect it through analogy and inference will be depleted? If any of these scenarios becomes reality, will such changes alter other deep reading processes, particularly empathy, perspective talking, critical analysis, and the more verbal forms of creative thought in the next generation? Can more visual forms of knowledge compensate for such losses and even provide alternative vehicle for the development of these critical skills? Yeah, that's really a good question. We tamper with our youth intellectual development when we teach them to rely too heavily, too young, too soon on outside sources of knowledge. We also impede their progress in a digital culture when we teach them to rely too heavily, too long, only on the traditional forms of what they and we already know. The intellectual development of our children depends on finding an evolving, thoughtful balance between those two principles. That's the key messages of this whole of this book. The technology averse Socrates is not my only companion in such thoughts. During an interview with Charlie Rose, Google CEO Eric Schmidt cautioned, "I worry that the level of interruption, the sort of overwhelming rapidity of information, is in fact altering cognition." Altering? That's a very neutral word. It is affecting deeper thinking. I hope that Mr. Schmidt does not rue the day he ever said this, but I am grateful to him for his honest articulation that goes to the heart of my worries. Will altered cognition alter deep reading and deeper thinking? Catherine Steiner Adair titled her book The Big Disconnect to underscore her hope that parents can help their children disconnect from a digital overuse. I am sure she would agree that an equally time-sensitive disconnect concerns confronting the subtle move away from children's building and relying on their own intelligence when they discover the ease of their access to external sources of knowledge. The psychologist Susan Greenfield took this position to its furthest point in a thought experiment. Imagine in the future people become so used to external access for any form of reference that they have not internalized any facts at all, let alone put them into a context to appreciate their significance and understand them. All of these questions and concerns may seem to contradict the intellectually visionary work on the future of intelligence as conceptualized by futurists like Ray Kurzweil. Through his book and his extraordinary inventions, Kurzweil envisions a future in which human intelligence will become continuous, while artificial intelligence, the singularity principle, allowing us to develop exponentially expanded intellectual capacities. Regardless of the ethical and personal social issues involved in such visions of future, whether the coming generations will develop highly sophisticated and analogical, empathic, critically analytic, and creative capacities, or not is our responsibility now. No self-respecting internal review board at any university would allow a researcher to do what our culture has already done with no adjudication or previous evidence. Introduce a complete quasi-addictive set of attention-compelling devices without knowing the possible side effects and ramifications for the subject, our kids. Tristan Harris is a Silicon Valley technology expert whose knowledge about the persuasion design principles in various apps and devices led him to become an outspoken critic of how features based on these principles are intentionally selected to addict users. Josh Eltman, another Silicon Valley expert who applauds Harris' efforts, compares the use of the addictive features of various devices to the tobacco industry's use of addiction-forming nicotine before the link with cancer was discovered. The founder of the advocacy initiative Time Well Spent, Harris recently stated in interviews that's a typo. That's definitely a typo. Interviews with PBS and the Atlantic. Never before in history have the decisions of a handful of designers, mostly men, white, living in San Francisco, aged 25 to 35, working at three companies, Google, Apple, and Facebook, had so much impact on how millions of people around the world spend their attention. We should feel an enormous responsibility to get this right. Most of us, including the majority of people leading and working in those three companies, would agree with this responsibility and indeed embrace it. Are they? Okay, I should stop here. This was Minky. Please correct me if you can. Thank you.